All right, hi everybody. So in this quick video, we're going to go over the types of images that you might see on a website, from the typical to the not typical, probably. So the three most typical images types that you might see are a JPEG, which can have a JPG or JPEG extension, GIF. Some people say GIF. Supposedly the guy who invented it calls it a GIF, so I'll call it a GIF. That's a legend anyway. And then PNG, people say PNG. It's portable network graphic, which was kind of developed, I think, as a replacement for these two. These two have been around forever, since like the 90s, maybe more, maybe older. And then the PNG is a little bit newer, but you'll see these three are the most typical kinds of image file types you'll see on the web. And they each have different advantages. So a JPEG, so here's an example of a JPEG right here. And the advantages for a JPEG are it's better for photographic type images. And you might hear the term continuous tone. That means images that are kind of real life. They're not, there's sort of gradual gradations of color and things. So they're basically better for photographic type images. They can have millions of colors, 16.7 million or something like that. They are lossy compression, which means it throws out information to reduce file size. The more you compress it, the smaller it gets, file size-wise, but the worse it will look. So your job when you're optimizing JPEGs is to kind of balance the image quality with the file size. There's no transparency in the JPEG, no animation. There is a newer version called JPEG 2000. Sounds like sort of a weird movie, but yeah, there is one, but I think people just use basically the regular JPEG. You reduce the file size by increasing compression, which again reduces quality. I kind of said that already. So this example below here is about 88 kilobytes, this image right here. The second kind of image is a GIF or a GIF. I'm going to say GIF. And it is better for large areas of flat color like graphics, logos, etc. So let me zoom in here a little better so you can see this text a little better. So you're looking for things like that have not very many colors. So this is the FBI logo. This probably would be pretty good as a GIF in general, except for if I zoom way in, whoa, way in, this gold stuff around the edge, this around the edge of the logo or the seal, I guess it's a seal, has sort of gradients in it, which gradients are kind of fading from one color to another. There's a darker yellow to a lighter yellow. So that is not, that's a lot, there's a lot of colors in there. So this maybe would not be the best as a GIF, but I'm just showing it anyway as an example. So it is lossless compression, which means you can basically open it and edit it and close it, and you'll be okay. There is a lossy, sometimes you might see a lossy GIF setting in some Adobe apps, but I'm not sure if they may have taken that out. Let me go back to JPEGs just for a second. Because this is lossy compression, what you want to avoid with a JPEG is you don't want to open a JPEG, do a bunch of things to it, and then save it out again as a JPEG, because every time you do that, it will lose a little bit of quality. It's kind of like copying an old videotape. Nobody knows what those are. Videotapes are gone, right? But if you make a copy of it, like a Xerox, right? If you Xerox something, then you Xerox the Xerox, and then you Xerox the Xerox of the Xerox, it gets worse every time. So that's why you want to always try to work from the original image or a PSD file, Photoshop file, when you're working, and don't open a JPEG and edit it repeatedly. It'll just degrade eventually. Yeah, so I want to throw that in there. GIF does allow animation. So here is you've all seen animated GIFs probably. Here's an animated GIF. They're very popular again. They used to be, they're a very old type of image file. They kind of fell out of favor a little bit with Flash and other types of animation, but they've kind of made a comeback recently, so you'll see them all over the place. You can also make GIFs from video and all kinds of stuff. So they're back, I guess. So it does allow animation. It does allow also 1-bit transparency. What does that mean? That means each pixel is either completely transparent or completely opaque. It's either all the way on or all the way off. So that can cause issues a little bit if you want to use transparency in a GIF. So here's a GIF or a little illustration about that, where you see the edge of a circle just as a GIF, and it's actually made up of these halftone kind of colors. So when you see a blue circle, it's not really all blue. It's smoothed out because of anti-aliasing. This is an anti-alias edge. You can't make a round circle out of squares. That's the gist of it, right? So everything is actually made out of little squares. So you have to kind of fake it with these anti-aliased edges. And then when you do that in a GIF that has the white part, for instance, transparent, then you might get this little halo. And the reason is you see these pixels that are they're not white, but they're not blue. You see them along the edge of the transparent GIF because the pixel has to be on or off. There's no in between. If you tape it all the way off, it gets jagged. So let me show you another example of that. So here's an example. This is a GIF that's transparent, and you can see the halo here a little bit because the matte color, or the color that the text is up against, is white, but the background of this page is gray. If I drag this thing, you can kind of see that. You can see it's got transparent parts to that image. This one is a PNG. So a PNG file, which we'll look at in a minute, can have full transparency. One more thing about that. Here's another page. Here is a page with five versions of this logo. Each one is a different file type. So this is if I drag it over to the right, you can kind of see the outline of that. That is against a solid color. So this logo was made to have a gray background that matched the page background. So you don't actually have to use transparency all the time if you don't need it. You just need it when you want to be able to see through parts of your image. This is a GIF that has the anti-aliasing turned off, and you can see how jagged that looks. I'm really blown up here, so it doesn't really look that way at regular size, but it'll get a jagged edge. This one is another GIF that has a matte color that matches this background. The matte color is the edge of the image, or outside the white part. So this one has a matte color, I think, that has gray on it. And then this is a PNG, and then this is a JPEG. So just so to show you how you can see the way that images look depending on what background they're on and transparency-wise. So just a little bit about transparency. Okay, so back to a GIF. So a GIF, with a GIF, you reduce the file size by reducing the number of colors. Basically, a GIF likes the fewest number of colors that you can use and have it still look pretty good. So the example below here, this is a GIF, is 181 kilobytes and has 256 colors. That's the most number of colors you can have in a GIF, is 256 colors or less. That's why they're better for images like graphics and logos, because you can't have a lot of colors in there. They're not good for, or you can have graphics and logos that have few colors. They're not really good for photos because there's more than 256 colors in a real world kind of image, right? So they are not that good for photos. And the reason this one has 256 colors instead of less is because of all these gradients that we talked about in the yellow part. The file size could be reduced by reducing the number of colors, but you would see banding in the gradients. Banding is when you can kind of see transitions between the colors. This third format here is called a PNG. There are a couple of different versions of PNG. There's an 8-bit version and a 24-bit version. You can think of the 8-bit version as kind of like a GIF, which is an 8-bit image, meaning it only has, it's 2 to the 8th if you want to get technical about it, which is 256. And then 24-bit is a full bit image, which would kind of be like a JPEG, or a full color image, kind of like a JPEG. So the advantage of a PNG is you can preserve full transparency using alpha channels. So what does that mean? That means that here is this PNG. If you look closely, hopefully you can see it in the video, there is no background around the edge of this. We're seeing the background of the page, or the page background. So if I drag this off, you can see that it's transparent. But there's also no halo problem. And that's because a PNG has full transparency, meaning you can fade the edge of the PNG out instead of having it be one pixel there and the next one's off. So you don't have that problem with the halos. So that's why people like to use PNGs, is because of that. Now, if you don't need to use that transparency, you're probably better off for this particular image. This is the same image. This is a PNG version, and this is a JPEG version. If you don't need this transparency stuff, then you're probably better off using a JPEG because the file size is different. So this one, because it is a 24-bit PNG file with full transparency, it's 423 kilobytes, which is what, like 5 times bigger than this one? So this JPEG is about 5 times smaller than this. The only reason to use this PNG probably is because if you wanted to have this transparency kind of effect. So that's something about that. All right, so those are the three biggies, the main contenders, JPEG, GIF, and PNG. There are a couple of others that you might see, so I throw those in here too, so you can check that out. One is called Data URI, you can see this page offline outside the video, so we don't have to go through all this. But basically what it means is you're embedding the image content into the page, meaning it's not a separate file, it's actually in the page. So here's a data URI image on this page. But how do I see this information? If I go to the source of this page that we're actually looking at right now, which may look different when you actually go to the actual page. If I scroll down, what is that? That is nasty looking stuff, right? That is the actual code that is encoding this image. So what I'm saying is the code for that image is part of the HTML file that we're looking at. It's not a separate image file like the rest of these are. This is a separate file, this is a separate file, this is a separate file. So are these two. But this one is not. This is part of the HTML page, and that's why here it is. It's right here in the code for this page. We're looking at the page that, we're looking at the code for the page that we've been looking at, and that's the code for that image. Probably a bad idea for this particular image because it's too complicated. The benefits of this kind of image are that you don't have to download a separate file. But the downside would be this is too complicated an image probably to use for that technique. The idea is being that sometimes you might want to use these kinds of images because they can reduce the number of calls to the server and kind of optimization stuff. But yeah, so there's some links here and things about that if you want to check it out. There are converters online as well. Here's a converter. You drag the file in here and it converts it into that ugly code that we just saw. It's not like you write that code or anything. That would be fun, right? I want to write all this code. No, that's not fun. Okay, so the next one is SVG, stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. And what that means is it's not based on pixels, but it's descriptions of shapes and colors, etc. So if you've ever used Illustrator or a vector drawing tool, that's kind of what it is. It's kind of like instead of saying, I've got a circle that is, instead of having to describe every pixel in a circle, like this, right? If this was a GIF or a JPEG, you have to describe the color of each pixel. But if it's a vector graphic, you say, hey, just make a blue circle that's about this big in this color. So it can be a lot smaller file size. Again, it's good for like things with flat colors and logos and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of a replacement a little bit for Flash-based images used to be. They're vector-based as well, so Flash is kind of going away a little bit. They can have a small file size, so that's an advantage. It's resolution independent, which means you can make it as big as you want. It'll still look clean and nice. These will not, right? If you blow this up to the size of half of a building or a billboard, it's going to probably be fuzzy depending on the resolution, how many pixels are in it. But SVG, since it's just a mathematical or a coded description of a shape, it doesn't matter how big it gets. So that's the beauty of vector art. That's why you see logos often are done in vector because they can be any size you want, and they always look good on when they're scaled up or down. They can also be small. So there's advantages to SVG files. So this is an SVG version of this graphic. The file size on this one is pretty big, even though I said that SVGs can be small, and that's probably because of all these gradients and junk in here. If it was a simple image with flat colors, meaning not gradients, then it would be probably pretty small. All right, the last one is Canvas. So Canvas is a new kind of imaging, I guess, technique or technology that's part of HTML5. And it is a way to draw images on the fly, usually using JavaScript, like I said. So it's kind of like you're coding the image. The advantage of that is it can be changed on the fly. So you could use it to do things like animation, or you could use it to do things like maybe you want to draw a a graph of something, like somebody's balances in their checking account, in their savings account. You want to make a pie chart or something, you could have that drawn on the fly. Now, it takes a lot of programming to do that because it's all scripted, but it's possible. So there's some links here that you could check out. So this is a beautiful rendering of a canvas drawing, and this code is actually also on the page, the code for this page. This is not an image per se, it's coded and rendered by the browser. So if I go back to, that's a scary code again. If I go back to the top, here's the script. So this is a JavaScript, or a script that's in the head of the page, and it's actually drawing that that design, or that image that we're seeing right here. So there's 3 lines here, and you can see there's kind of 3 little drawing. And I'm not going to get into this code or anything because it's yeah, we don't need to talk about that right now. But that's how that image is made. It's made by code, actually. So that's another type of image that you might see. Not too often do you see it yet. Yeah, so yeah, not too often yet. So the ones you're going to see mostly are these 3 again, JPEG, GIF, and PNG. And then you are going to see SVGs quite a bit nowadays too, because they're good for things like logos and icons and things like that, because they can scale and they're small and things like that. So, but anyways, okay, so that is it about typical file types that you might see on the web, and I will talk to you again next time.